Virginia today. Scenes familiar to all of us. Scenes so much a part of our lives that we can't believe things could ever have been very much. Yet less than 400 years ago, none of these familiar things was here. All of Virginia was forest primeval, and there was not a white man anywhere. There were people living here then. Indians in small villages of bark huts. The Indian men were hunters, their weapons bows and arrows. The plentiful wildlife provided them with their fish and other meat. These the Indians cooked to eat. They also raised and ate corn. These Indians and this forest were the Virginia that awaited the first English colonists. A very different Virginia from that described by those who returned to London after voyages to America. Tall tales of the New World's wealth were repeated and believed everywhere. Quick fortunes and land aplenty would reward those who ventured to America. Sir Thomas Smith, as well as other London business leaders of the day, foresaw great profit if they could secure the right to form a company and colonize a section of America. They petitioned King James I for this right. He granted them a royal charter to make habitation, plantation, and a colony of our people in that part of America called Virginia. And so the ships of the newly chartered London Company were ready late in 1606 to carry more than 100 men to Virginia. Friends and relatives were there at the departure to wish the men Godspeed. The departure was gay. The New World promised much. And high hopes were needed for an ocean crossing in the ships of those days. The three ships of the company, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery, were small, powered by sails alone, and ocean travel was slow. Storms often made the voyages very long, and because storms were encountered by the company's ships, it took them some 4 months to cross the 3,000 miles from England to America, especially as they followed the longer West Indies route usually taken in those days. Great indeed were the hardships and discomforts of those long voyages. The colonists must have indeed rejoiced when they finally saw Virginia's shores. Virginia, where they believed their dreams would all come true. The three ships had reached the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. After a first landing at Cape Henry, they sailed across the bay and found before them the broad mouth of the James River. Up the James they went, searching for some island strong by nature, a most wholesome and fertile place, which the company's instructions gave as the right site for their settlement. At last they found what they sought, where a creek made almost an island of a peninsula. Here they arrived on May 13th, 1607, and here they were to found the first permanent English settlement in all America. Almost half the colonists were gentlemen, upper-class Englishmen. Some had served in foreign wars, but all gentlemen were more accustomed to a life of ease and were quite unused to working with their hands. And hard work was in store for all as soon as they landed. The forest that was everywhere had to be cleared. Then a fort had to be built to protect the colonists. The greater part of the men worked building the palisaded fort. But Sir Christopher Newport, Captain John Smith, and a number of colonists at the same time were ready to go exploring up the river in a small boat, for the company's instructions were to discover the country around the site chosen for the settlement. Along the shores, astonished Indians watched the explorers. And soon the explorers were being entertained with much courtesy in every place. Thus did the explorers proceed unmolested up the James until rapids and falls barred their further course by water. Here, at the site of present-day Richmond, the explorers raised a cross to show England's claim to the westward reaches in America. A claim the fort further down the river was making a reality. Within the stockade, buildings soon were rising, crude because of the rough forest building materials, but still something like the homes the colonists had left in England. While even the fort's larger buildings may have looked rather crude compared with what the colonists had known in England, they looked decidedly impressive to the watching Indians, who became suspicious, grew worried. A band of white men traveling through their lands held no threat at all. But this fort clearly showed the white men were come to stay. So they tried to destroy the Englishmen and their fort. But the ship's cannon routed the attack. Within the stockade, the men were safe, provided with the necessities for life. A storehouse for food and supplies, this being an enterprise where all shared equally. A well to bring them drinking water. And a church where all could worship as they had in England and find the same spiritual comfort here as there. This Jamestown fort was the first of many that were to be constructed in Virginia. The fort was built within some 7 weeks. Then 2 of the ships sailed away for England to bring back more men and more supplies. They left behind within the fort some 105 colonists who claimed they were very bare and scanty of victuals, and furthermore in wars and in danger of the savages. The Indians, indeed, seemed the greatest threat to life, but the land where they had settled was itself to prove a far greater one. Unhealthy swamps were near the fort, and in the stagnant swamp water bred disease as summer's heat increased. That summer, most of the colonists fell sick and many died, often 3 or 4 in a night. 40 of the 105 were dead before the summer ended, the first of other summers that were to bring sickness and death in the years to come. The colonist survivors were discouraged. They had little work to do except guard duty at the palisade. This crudely built fort was hard to reconcile with the riches the colonists had expected from Virginia. And so was this unending forest all around. Those in command, even the braver ones like Captain George Percy, an earl's brother, noblest born of them all, and Captain John Smith, bold, active soldier that he was, were disheartened by the hardships all about and even quarreled among themselves. But with the autumn's cooler days, sickness among the colonists almost ceased. And barter was established with the more friendly Indians by Captain John Smith for the extra food the colonists needed. Then the ships arrived from England with more colonists, but not enough supplies to feed them and those already in the fort over the winter months that still lay ahead. A pattern was beginning which was to repeat itself again and again over the next few years. Sickness and starvation in the ill-heated houses during the winter months. A moment of healthy respite in the spring. And the planting of a few crops. Then summer's heat, and sickness everywhere again. Indeed, in the early years, death claimed 5 out of every 6 colonists who ventured their lives in Virginia. This glass factory, built at enormous effort from forest materials, was another first. A first attempt at manufacture. A trial run of glass was made. And samples of the glass products were sent back to England. Some 10 shiploads of colonists arrived within the first 3 years, bringing around 800 colonists to Virginia, to the grim reality of life surrounded by forest primeval. The winter of 1609 and 1610 climaxed all hardships heretofore. Famine and disease reduced the 500 colonists to less than 60. So sick and weak, the colony must surely have ended had not Lord Delaware arrived, the first of many titled Englishmen to be sent to administer the colony as Lord Governor and Captain General of Virginia, appointed with full authority to rule and be obeyed by all. Lord Delaware brought with him a host of new colonists, well provisioned with supplies, and with these the pattern of the early hardship years began to change. Soon Sir Thomas Dale, professional soldier, stern, religious man, came to take over the command when Lord Delaware fell ill and left. Dale was a strict disciplinarian, as was Governor Gates, and under their 5-year rule, all the colonists were governed under military law more strict than any they had known before. All men were assigned to perform specific work in the fields and in the forest. All were regularly required to attend church services for the good of their souls, and punished swiftly and publicly was any colonist for the slightest misconduct. And the same sort of vigorous, unrelenting punishment was brought by Captain Argall and others to the Indians for their former misdeeds against the colonists. The English burned and pillaged Indian villages everywhere. Bribing some influential natives, they captured Pocahontas, favorite daughter of Powhatan, most powerful Indian chief. New fields were begun along the James in many different places, pushing back the forest edge. Most were worked by all the men to provide food for all the colony. But in addition, Governor Dale was allowing each man 3 acres to plant and harvest as he wished, once he had fulfilled his required labor for the colony. Now, for the first time, a man had some incentive for his work, and a chance to store up food and make a little profit for himself until such time as the colony sufficiently prospered and he would receive the sizable grant of land he had long been promised, and for which he lived and labored. To the Jamestown church, one day in April 1614, came the colonists to attend a wedding that helped assure peaceful relations with the Indians. Pocahontas, Powhatan's favorite daughter, converted to the Christian faith, was becoming a colonist herself as she married colonist John Rolfe. And John Rolfe, too, was doing his own part for the success of the colony. In tobacco culture, his experiments were to result in a plant that pleased the taste of English smokers. Here was another beginning, that of the vast tobacco industry we know today. More and more fields were put into the crop, the first that returned substantial profits to Virginia planters. In the tobacco fields, true helpmates were the wives of those few colonists who had brought wives over with them. Women had been in the colony since its 2nd year, but always in too small a number, far, far fewer women than men. The tobacco trade was brisk from the first. Ships which brought new colonists returned to England with cargoes of tobacco. Another beginning came when a Dutch man of war brought to the colony in 1619 the first Negroes to Virginia. Another beginning that same year of 1619 was the meeting of the first Virginia General Assembly in the Jamestown Church. Here representatives elected by the people sat with Governor Yardley and his council to formulate laws for the growing Virginia colony. From these men have descended the form of government, federal, state, and local, which we know today, where the people's representatives work for the welfare of those who elect them and for the good of all. Jamestown's houses now began to reflect the colony's growing prosperity and size. A number of unmarried maids were sent out to the colony in 1620 to become the wives of those colonists they chose, provided the men would meet the cost of their passage over by paying its equivalent value in tobacco, which was then used as money in the colony. Tobacco fields were everywhere, pushing back the forest edge by 1622, 15 years after the colony's founding. The colonists, however, felt no fear of the Indians. Even though Pocahontas and Powhatan were now both dead, peaceful and friendly relations continued to prevail. But suddenly the Indians everywhere made a surprise attack. At a given hour on Good Friday morning, 1622, slaughtered were some 350 colonists, a third of the entire population. But even this attack did not destroy the well-established Virginia colony. To Jamestown streets came better buildings as the 1600s ran their allotted course. A brick state house, the center house of this group of three. Sturdy homes. And on the farms, dwellings became more substantial. More and more craftsmen and artisans were working everywhere, bettering old products, producing new ones like silk for the first time within the colony. From the Jamestown State House, royal governors ruled. Most had the good of the colony at heart, but one at least, Sir John Harvey, was so autocratic and high-handed, the colonists deposed him and sent him back to England. Thus, even under the early British governors, was stirring the spirit that would grow and lead to American independence. The colonists had sacrificed so much, labored so hard to establish Virginia, that they would have no one attempt to withhold their rights from them. This spirit fully showed itself when the Indians tried to stop further establishment of plantations along the colony's western border. Governor Berkeley refused to take action himself or give his sanction for Nathaniel Bacon, a planter, to lead a group of colonists against the Indians. But these colonists gathered just the same under Bacon's command to protect their lands and make war on the Indians. To Jamestown then came Bacon and his followers after they had subdued the Indians. Governor Berkeley dramatically bared his chest for Bacon to shoot him, but Bacon said he had not come to harm the governor, that his and his men's only demand was the right to defend their frontier homes. Again, Jamestown was a place of beginnings. The first stirring of the spirit of American independence when the colonists openly defied a royal governor. Bacon's followers finally put the torch to Jamestown to prove their point. They were somehow symbolically starting those sparks of independence which 100 years later were to burst into the full flame of the American Revolution and bring into existence a new, free nation. Jamestown was in part rebuilt after the fire, but it never regained its earlier importance, and in 1699, after 92 years, ceased to be the colony's capital. But it had already played its part where first began so many of our democratic privileges. the freedoms we must continually strive for and protect. In this our life, in these United States today,